Welcome to Caregiving Club On Air. This podcast is dedicated to the millions of family caregivers who want wellness tips and self-care solutions, who seek expert advice, and who want news about healthy aging and how to create well home design in our forever homes. I'm Sherri, a corporate gerontologist, author, and educator, a TV interviewer, host, and news commentator. I'm joining you from Southern California, where our interviews and news take us all across the country to explore the many ways to help you on your caregiving journey and to lift you up here at Caregiving Club On Air. The Caregiving Club On Air. I'm your host, Sherri, and we have got a lot that is packed into this second of our September episodes. And for this episode, we're going to focus a lot on Alzheimer's for World Alzheimer's Day, which is September 21st. And we have a fantastic interview with our guest expert, who is Dr. Sadarangani. And she is going to tell us about certain things that are going to help us reduce our risks, lifestyle choices we can make. She does a lot of really great information that she releases on Instagram under the Enlightened Caregiver is her label, but also she's an innovator and an entrepreneur because she has created a new app called Caremobi, and she's going to tell us how that keeps families and healthcare professionals connected and communicating when it comes to dementia caregiving. And then she and I we're going to dive into the latest research. She's got so much great things to share with us. We're going to talk a little bit about Hemming Willis, who is the wife of actor Bruce Willis, and her new book that came out on dementia caregiving and self-care. We're going to talk a little bit about some of the rumblings and backlash that Emma's received and whether we think that's actually accurate or not. But just a lot of really great things about brain health. So stay tuned for that great interview with Dr. Tina. In our caregiver wellness news, again, sticking with our theme of World Alzheimer's Day, but also September being National Self-Care Month, we're going to go over some of the lifestyle choices again that we're going to talk about with Dr. Tina. But two things that you may not have heard that will help reduce your Alzheimer's and dementia risk, and that is copper in your diet and also journaling. So stay tuned for that. I'm going to share some new insights as to how these two things can actually help reduce your risk. We're also going to touch base and do a little shout out to some of my colleagues and friends. I've mentioned the No Fear campaign from Theora Care before, but this time I'm going to talk a little bit about how they're addressing wandering for Alzheimer's adults and how family caregivers can deal with that. We're also going to do a shout out to my friend and colleague Brooks Kenny, who started a new fashion company called Moorlow. And it's all about pickleball and purpose. And I'll tell you a little bit about that and how that relates to brain health. And then also we're going to touch base, or I'm going to give you some insights on the 9/11 first responders. You know, we still have victims and health issues from that horrific day 24 years ago. I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the brain health issues that are affecting those first responders and have created a lot of family caregivers that we never anticipated. So stay tuned for that. And then in Well Home Design news, we're going to stick with, again, our Alzheimer's, focus here. And we're going to talk a little bit about neurodesign, or what we call dopamine design, but also what is this new TikTok trend? Everyone's talking about hundreds of millions of TikTok videos on depression rooms. What is that? So we'll tell you a little bit about that. We'll also give you some insights on September being Emergency Preparedness Month and what you need to think about as a family caregiver, particularly with older loved ones. And finally, some new research from Zinnia TV on how their type of solution that they're bringing is actually helping to reduce stress for both Alzheimer's adults and caregivers, and more other, great benefits. So stay tuned for results from that research that we'll share with you. But for now, let's dive into our caregiver wellness news. So as I mentioned, we have so much to dig into today. We're going to try to go through this pretty fast so we can get to our great interview with Dr. Tina. But let me start first with just a little review of Alzheimer's and dementia, because I know a lot of people sometimes have questions about what's really the difference between those two things. So let me give you some insights. First of all, dementia is similar to cancer in that it is a category of diseases that affect the brain that are typically degenerative, which means they progress and get worse over time. Now, Alzheimer's is the most prevalent type of dementia. So, about anywhere from 60 to 70% of all dementia cases are Alzheimer's disease. But that doesn't mean that that's all we have. We also have things like vascular dementia. We have Lewy body dementia, which many of us have probably heard about because of the radio DJ Casey Kasem, or maybe Robin Williams, the comedian actor Robin Williams had Lewy body. We also have frontotemporal dementia, which we're going to talk a little bit about with Dr. Tina, because Bruce Willis, the actor, has frontotemporal dementia. And then there's mild cognitive impairment, which is actually kind of a pre-dementia. Now, it does not mean that you will continue to progress if you have MCI. You can just stick with MCI sometimes, and it'll stay steady, and it will have certain impacts like some memory loss, but it doesn't progress. Once it starts to progress into dementia, then it becomes a type of dementia. But MCI is actually kind of like a precursor to that. So you may have heard of that with certain people who have MCI. So that just kind of gives you a primer. And some of the statistics that came out of the Alzheimer's Association recent, they do a facts and statistics report. Facts and figures is what they call it, that just came out. I think it was in July. So now we have 7.2 million people in the US living with Alzheimer's. That's a number that will almost double over the next 25, 30 years. We also have 12 million, nearly 12 million family caregivers who are caring for someone with dementia. Interestingly enough, we have subgroups of our society that are at higher risk, and that includes women. Women are 2/3 of all of the dementia and Alzheimer's cases out there. Lots of research going into that. We're going to talk with Dr. Tina a little bit about some of that. We also know that our communities of color, so African Americans and Latinos, have a higher risk. African Americans are twice as likely as whites, and Latinos are 1.5 times as likely as whites or Caucasians to develop dementia later in life. We also have a higher risk in our veteran population. And interestingly, it's pretty high. 47% of veterans have a risk of developing Alzheimer's, versus if you look at just the general global population, it's only 15%. Still high, but look how high, it's almost triple. Or it's more than triple, actually, the veterans' risk. And a lot of that has to do with things like PTSD, which is a mental health issue that is also a high risk for Alzheimer's, and also things like TBI, traumatic brain injuries. And for more information about that, you should go back and check out our podcast interview and episode with the Elizabeth Dole Foundation. I'll have that on the episode guide page to make it easy for you guys, and I'll give you the link. But we talked a lot about TBI and other things like that that happen within our veterans population. We also know that caregivers are in their role, if they're caring for someone with dementia, twice as long as other types of caregivers. So whether you're caring for someone with cancer or COPD or diabetes or heart failure, uh, you won't spend as much time on average as someone who's caring for someone with dementia or Alzheimer's. The average for general caregiving is 4.5 years. Dementia caregiver average is 9 years. However, there are many, many, many people, and some people we've interviewed actually on this podcast, who talk about how they've been caregiving for a loved one with dementia for 20 plus years. So it can be a very long journey. And again, everybody progresses at a different pace through the disease. So you just don't know how long that caregiving journey will be, which is why it becomes so important to have that balance of self care. And we'll talk about that in a minute. Now, in fact, we'll talk about it right now. There is a new study that just came out, and it's about caregiver burnout of those who are caring for someone with dementia. Now, we know that, again, dementia caregivers have higher rates of stress and burnout, higher rates of depression. But this new study took a specific look at the caregivers of those with Alzheimer's whose loved ones wander. Now, if your loved one has Alzheimer's, in about the mid stage of the disease, 60% of them will wander. They just wander off. And typically at night, because we know that Alzheimer's adults, their circadian rhythms are thrown off. They're kind of the opposite of what the rest of us hopefully have, which is, you sleep during dark hours and you're awake during light hours. Well, a lot of our Alzheimer's adults will be very drowsy and sleepy during the day and very active at night. So there's a lot of things we can talk about that help you kind of shift that, keeping them active during the day, getting them out in the sunshine, making sure they have enough vitamin D through either sunshine or other nutrients, doing some light therapy lamp sessions at home. All of those things will help you with that wandering. But it's a very obviously distracting thing for the family caregiver who might be asleep at night and all of a sudden you hear the door open and your loved one's out the door and down the street. And again, I've heard this from many, many caregivers. And so this new study took a look at that specific subset of dementia caregivers, and they found that actually much higher rates of burnout, much higher rates of stress. So again, all of these things that come with this disease are impacting not just the person with the disease, but obviously their family caregiver. And that's how we're going to shift now into conversation around Alzheimer's caregiving and self-care, which September is also, as we said, National Self-Care Month. So there was a new study that came out. It's actually an ongoing study called the Pointer Study here in the US. It's called something different in Europe and worldwide, and it's been done worldwide. So this is a study that it's very similar methodology being done around the globe. But the one in the US actually used our friends from Posit Science, their brain HQ exercises as part of this particular study. And it was really interesting. So I wanted to just share this with you. They found that if you can adopt a certain kind of training regimen, if you will, that includes brain exercises, not brain games, by the way. We've talked about this with Henry. I'm going to have a link to his episode so you can go back and listen to that. But he really gives us insights as to what's the difference between brain games and brain exercises, and they are very different. So if we can develop a regimen, and I'm going to tell you what that regimen is, we can actually reduce the risk for those of us who don't have Alzheimer's, but also help to maybe slow the progression of the disease or some of the symptoms of the disease for those who have the early stage of Alzheimer's, which is what this was done. So let me read this to you. um, the researchers used the training app, and it was a schedule of about 50 to 60 minutes per week. And I'm going to break that down for you what they did in those moments, 60 minutes per week. And so they had over 2,000 adults who were in the age range of 60 to 79 who had an elevated risk for Alzheimer's. So they maybe didn't have Alzheimer's yet, but they had a higher risk. Maybe they had a genetic link, or some of their lifestyle habits are putting them in that risk category that we have talked about, smoking, drinking too much, being obese, having diabetes, having hearing loss you're not managing, having vision loss you're not managing, living in areas of high pollution, all that kind of stuff. And by the way, we have a whole life's 14 lifestyle self hacks you can do as one of my videos I'll talk about in a minute. Anyway, what the research did is they engaged them in walking, and they did that 4 days a week for 35 minutes. So it was, around maybe less than 10 minutes a day. You can do 5 minutes a day, and that would still work because that's going to equal out to about 35 minutes. And in fact, a Johns Hopkins research study separate from this said 5 minutes of walking a day is going to reduce your dementia risk if you keep it up for 4 years. It'll reduce your dementia risk by 41%. Hello, we can all do that, right? Even busy caregivers. And I know you're out there and you're thinking, oh, I can't even squeeze 5 minutes out. You have to. You have to give that gift to yourself because you want to keep going. You want the stamina, but you also want to reduce your risk of getting this disease. So 5 minutes a day, you can do like 4,800 steps. That's, it's not the 10,000 steps. That was a big marketing campaign that had no science behind it. 4,800 steps a day. So that maybe can become part of your goals. But anyway, so they found that, okay, so that's the aerobic side of this, that walking 35 minutes to 60 minutes a week is going to reduce it, but also doing strength training for about 15 or 20 minutes for a couple of days a week. And flexibility, stretching, right? So if any of you have taken classes, I know that I'm not good at self-directed exercise. I have to take a class. I have to have the teacher telling me what to do next. But if you do all this, sometimes the classes combine all of these three things, which is really great. But flexibility for about 10 or 15 minutes a couple days a week. So this is not tough stuff, right? And then adopting the MIND diet. Now, the MIND diet is basically the Mediterranean diet, but with more green, leafy greens and more berries. So you're going to eat a lot of dark leafy greens, berries, nuts, whole grains, olive oil, and fish. Limit your sugar and your unhealthy fats. That's basically the MIND diet. And then brain exercises, as we talked about. So you can check out Posit Science and Brain HQ. Those are the exercises they used in this study, and they did it for about 3 times a week for about 15 minutes per session. And that reduced the people in this study, reduced their risk significantly in developing Alzheimer's. So it's not too tough of a lift. I know sometimes I say that, and caregivers are like, again, I can't even squeeze out 1 minute. But give this gift to yourself. Get the help that you need, accept that help, find those minutes that you can, stay off social media for 15 minutes and replace it with one of these things we just talked about. That to me is the easy one, right? And you know how I feel about social media. So I'm going to talk about that more in a minute. Something else I wanted to share with you though is that there was a new study that came out. This is about copper. Now, as you can tell with my jacket, and I love rose gold jewelry, I love copper. Even my dog has copper fur, so that's why her name is Penny. But anyway, copper is this interesting thing that researchers have found. So this study was actually done with almost 2,500 adults over the age of 60. They found a link between if you have higher levels of copper in your diet, you have better cognitive function. Now, this doesn't go out, and this doesn't mean you go out and lick the pennies that you may still have, although I think we're stopped making pennies now. So now they're like an heirloom is to have a penny. But you can get your copper through things like foods like mushrooms, dark chocolate, wheat bran potatoes, interesting, and oysters. So those are just some of the foods that have copper, but you can check all that out. And the reason why copper is so important is because it's activating the iron metabolism, your energy production, your nerve function, your connective tissue function, and helps all of those things, including the cognitive function. And so when you absorb these things into your diet, it is actually going to help that brain health. Now, of course, copper can be toxic, so you want to be careful about supplements and things like that. Talk to your doctor first, but you can get it through just natural foods. So that was one thing I thought was interesting. There was also another study, and this is beyond the lifestyle stuff that we typically talk about to reduce your Alzheimer's risk and improve your brain health. Copper was one. The other study that I came across was journaling. Now, many of you out there I know love to journal. It is actually called bibliotherapy. If you are using journaling to reduce your stress, almost in the same way of meditation, you're just kind of releasing any of your toxic thoughts, your angers, your frustrations, your sadness, your depression, whatever it is, you're releasing it out onto the page and letting it go. It's similar to a breathing exercise where that is supposed to help you take it in and push it out, right? So journaling is actually really interesting. And this is, I mentioned social media. So you guys all know in my book, Me Time Monday, I write a lot about the pitfalls and the downsides and the toxicity of social media in our lives. And I know a lot of you love it. It's a way for you to connect to friends that you don't talk to all the time, but you have to be really careful because there's way too many studies now after we've done this for so many years that we find out it really is bad for us in a variety of ways. So read my book, you'll learn more, but I say, I get that you're not going to just abandon it, but again, balance. Balance is everything. You can't go too far down the rabbit hole on your social media on a daily basis and have a daily diet of that stuff. So here's a way to find your balance, right? Because journaling is a Luddite activity, and Luddites that was the movement against technology. But it's this study said handwritten notes So, writing thank you notes, writing a thank you note to yourself for being a caregiver, writing a note to a friend, sending a birthday card, but you write a note in it instead of just saying, Love Sherry. But handwritten notes in this study found that it activates your brain waves, the visual cortex, of course, because you're having to look at the page and, hopefully look at what your handwriting is saying, but also the sensory process. So it's a motor cortex, which is your hand moving, right? So those two things are working in sync, which is a little bit of a brain exercise. And so you can kind of see how this is going to help you, right? You don't get that, by the way, from being on social media because it's not using these two areas of your brain. So when you handwrite notes, it's using the right brain waves in the right way and kind of creating a little bit of that exercise. Now, in one study, they found that journal writing, if you can write, um, a certain amount of minutes, they said up to 20 minutes a week. Okay. So that might be a few notes or one long note or whatever it is, or one long journal post, whatever it happens to be. It reduces the risk of dementia by more than 50%. Wow. Right? I mean, if I told you, here's a pill, and if you take this, you'll reduce your Alzheimer's risk by 50%, I bet most of you would take it. Okay, this is not a pill. This is actually journal writing. But again, don't forget, this is not writing a letter on your computer. This is not, posting something on social media. No, that's not going to do it. You have to use your hands. I know we all have to get back to handwriting. Mine is awful because I never, handwrite things anymore. I'm always amazed by people, by authors who say, "Yeah, I handwrite my first draft." I'm like, "Oh my gosh, it would take me 100 million years to write a book." Anyway, I just thought that was interesting. Journaling is another thing that you can do. And then I just want to do a quick shout out. So I've mentioned the No Fear campaign from Theora Care, who actually I am an advisor to. I'm a gerontology advisor and consultant for them. And they have this No Fear campaign that I worked on. I think I talked about falls last episode where we focused on falls prevention, but we also talk in the campaign about wandering. Wandering being one of those big fears that we get, particularly if we have a loved one with dementia or we have dementia. We don't want to wander. And so the technology that Theora Care uses helps you overcome those fears. It helps you overcome the fear of wandering, overcome the fear of falling, and it's all because the technology is going to detect and prevent you, or at least be able to guide and manage you if you do have some of those things like wandering that happens. And there's some really great stories. A wonderful, wonderful story out of the Detroit PD Police Department, where law enforcement was able to recover a man with dementia who had wandered off because he had the Theora Care technology. So I'm going to have links to that so you can check that out. I also want to do a huge shout out to a great friend. She's been in the caregiving world with me for 15, 20 years. She's doing a lot of different things these days, but she's always been in the Alzheimer's and brain health world. And her name is Brooks Kenny. So she's both a friend and a colleague, but she launched a new fashion line. I'm so excited because I thought, well, this is a great time to do it. September is Fashion Week, right? Anyway, it's called Moorlow. Moorlow. I don't know if I say that right. I always, I kind of, stumble on words sometimes. Moorlow, I think it is, but I'm gonna have the link so you don't have to worry about how to pronounce it. Anyway, it's the cutest, greatest, wonderful, comfortable, well designed, fairly designed, whatever the fair rights in fashion and all that, for pickleball. And their tagline is pickleball with a purpose. And the reason why is because when you purchase their pickleball outfits, and you don't have to play pickleball. You could be a caregiver who just wants some fashion in your life. These things are so comfortable you can wear it if you want. Anyway, when you purchase from them, they donate to Bright Focus Foundation and Hilarity for Charity. And Hilarity for Charity, I've mentioned before, is the Lauren Miller Rogan and Seth Rogen charity that they started. I've done some things with them. They are wonderful. And it's nice to know that you're going to shop with a purpose. But anyway, big shout out to Brooks for launching that line. I know they're doing really, really well. We're going to have some of the fashions up on the episode guide page, and we'll also have the link where you can go and purchase. And we'll see if we can get a discount out of Brooks. I can't promise, but I think maybe we could do something there. So we'll get that set up. And then lastly, I mentioned 9/11. Last year, I did a very emotional kind of discussion on this podcast about 9/11. I have a very soft spot in my heart for the 9/11 first responders and victims of that horrific day. I can't believe it's been 24 years. It's like it was yesterday sometimes when I think about it. But I did want to let you know, and you're probably aware, that we now have more victims since 9/11 than on that day. And what that means is a lot of those first responders, a lot of the people that were at ground zero in New York and Manhattan, have developed a lot of health issues, gastrointestinal cancers, all kinds of different issues that they're suffering from, but also brain and cognitive issues. And I've written about this, how the first responders have brains that look like the brains of someone who might be 20 or 30 years older. Now that these younger first responders are in their 50s and 60s, they're starting to see cognitive issues, a lot of Alzheimer's type of dementia happening. So I'm going to have a link to that article that I wrote based on some research that's being done in New York, Long Island, and we just want to follow this. And of course, next year will be 25 years. Can't believe it, but we will certainly do a shout out and to all of those caregivers of our first responders who were there that day and are still living with the fallout from that. So with that, I want to go into this great interview with Dr. Tina. And as I mentioned, she has this great Instagram feed called Enlightened Caregiver. She's also developed this wonderful app called Caremobi. And she and I we're gonna talk about everything. We're gonna talk about research. We're gonna talk about lifestyle, brain health issues. We're gonna talk about Emma, Hemming Willis's new book and all the backlash that she's kind of seen through being out there on the talk show circuit and how we feel about that, what our thoughts are on that. Anyway, it is a wonderful, great conversation with Dr. Tina. So here we are. Here's my interview with Dr. Tina. Well, I am so thrilled to have our guest on this episode because, as you guys know, we're focusing on all things Alzheimer's for World Alzheimer's Month. And this is one of our rock stars in the dementia world, and her name is Dr. Tina Sadarangani, and she has a wonderful social media presence called the Enlightened Caregiver. But she's also doing some really fantastic research and things in age tech and innovation and all that. So we've got a lot to talk to her about. But Dr. Tina, welcome to Caregiving Club on Air.
Thank you. And thank you so much for having me. I'm so happy to be here.
Yeah, well, I'm thrilled to talk to you. I love all the stuff that you're doing. It's just fantastic. But before we, get into the deep details here of Alzheimer's and dementia, we always ask our guests, where are we talking to you from today?
You are talking to me from my home office in Larchmont, New York. So I live just outside of New York City where I usually work. You'll either find me in my New York City based office or here at home, juggling the realities of working and being a mom and caring for aging parents, which I know a lot of your listeners are also doing.
You are classic sandwich generation.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
Well, it's so great to have you on. And as I said, we've got so much to cover with you. But we're celebrating, of course, World Alzheimer's Month and World Alzheimer's Day on September 21st. And you have so much really great information on your social media. Your Instagram feed is one I was looking at. And I think one of the big questions that a lot of family caregivers ask is, what's kind of really the difference between maybe what we would call normal cognitive aging, and when should I be worried that maybe this is something that is more dementia or Alzheimer's based? And so what are kind of those maybe early warning signs I should be looking for?
Yeah, absolutely. So the biggest difference is that when we talk about dementia, Alzheimer's disease, frontotemporal dementia, all the things that you hear about, we're really talking about disease pathologies that are affecting the way you function on a day to day basis. And that's the big difference. Forgetting why I walked into a room for a second and then realizing, oh, it was to grab, a shirt. There are small lapses in attention that we can attribute to normal aging, things that happen when, we're busy or overwhelmed. But there are things and patterns that we start to see. And when they become more steady, they can really be indicative that there's something more serious going on here. And I'm happy to walk you all through those. I think The things we want to start looking for are, first of all, changes in our executive function. And again, these are changes in memory and cognition that are impacting our day-to-day life and our ability to function on our own. So when you start to see, mom suddenly is not paying her bills regularly, and it wasn't just the one time where, she switched credit cards, but it was really that there's a lot of backlog here. She's missing her prescriptions. She's not taking things regularly. She isn't able to remember her appointments, or follow recipes that have complex multi-step tasks. These are things that we are more subtle, but really are reflective of potentially something more serious going on. And it's patterns, it's consistencies. It's not one off, but it's something you're seeing on a regular basis. There's also issues that we often see with word finding. And so it's increasingly the way that we use fillers, like, oh, that thing I was looking for, as opposed to saying, oh, the pencil. Losing train of thought a lot. And really trying to give more, acting as though they're confidently giving details to cover gaps in their memory. The other common thing that we see is with driving. And so this is a huge thing. When you start to see that you're driving and you're getting lost in familiar places, this is a problem. When you're suddenly hesitating, you're seeing them hesitate at intersections, not sure what exactly they're doing, changes from their driving routine that are troublesome. Oftentimes, we'll also see changes in mood before we see changes in memory. So you might start to see, especially this is the case in non-Alzheimer's dementias, but you might see that they're more anxious, apathetic, or withdrawn. They're irritable. Some of those things can actually precede memory loss. So it's something to be aware of and not just write off. Oh, they're old, they're depressed, they're an old codger. Sometimes those can be indicators. And then finally, and this is probably one of the most serious concerns to look for, is safety red flags. This is why I say you can't get this from FaceTiming with your parents. A visit to the home will tell you a lot about spoiled food in the fridge, missing their medications, more frequent falls, seeing more burnt pans, forgetting to turn off the stove. Oftentimes we attribute this to, oh, they're just getting older, oh, they're under stress. And we delay our evaluation of these things. But I can't tell you how important it is for their safety and well being, especially because all of us want to remain at home as long as possible. And so noting these things early can really help in the future.
And those are so great. And one of the ones that kind of sticks out to me is when you mentioned, a withdrawal. And sometimes it's subtle, but when you have a loved one who maybe was very gregarious and very social, but now all of a sudden they don't want to engage in a conversation with a group because they're fearful that they might say the wrong thing, or they realize something wrong is going on. I think that's kind of a subtle one, but it's a really important one.
Absolutely. And I think giving them safe spaces where they can continue to engage, where they don't feel that they are unable to interact, places and spaces that maximize their potential at whatever stage of dementia they have, is so important to their longevity, to their well being, to their function. Because as you said, if you feel that it's an overwhelming situation, all of us feel this way, you tend to withdraw. And what I always say about people with dementia is this: even as their memory loss progresses into the later stages, they still have antennae. They still can sense deeply that something is not right, or they don't feel safe in a situation, or something is that they don't feel comfortable. The behaviors that we often see in dementia are a response to that, an inability to articulate. So to the extent possible that you can create places throughout their journey where they can interact and maximize to their fullest potential, that is the best and healthiest thing that you can do for them, even when you start to notice those early changes.
Well, since we're sort of talking about social interactions and communication, we know that as the disease progresses, the communication becomes maybe a little bit more difficult. And you have some really great stuff that I was looking at on your Instagram feed. And one of the things that I thought, I'm just going to jump to this because I just felt like it was so important, is you had something on there about the 9 things, I think it was, the 9 words or whatever, that you don't want to say to someone with dementia. So share with us What is that? What do we need to be cautious or careful or, cognizant about?
Yes, I think the key thing when we communicate with people is with living with dementia is that we really want to validate where they're coming from and then attempt to, especially, in the appropriate circumstances, redirect them. You may have somebody, and I'll just give you an example that gets at some of those sort of nine things, but somebody telling you living with dementia who's clearly not been to work in several years and trying to exit the home because they're late for work. They're late for work. How do you approach that? The worst possible way is to say, you stay at home, you're 80 years old, you haven't worked in 10 years, get back in here. We
Hmm.
can't do that. What we can do is validate where they're coming from. You know what? I see that you're late. You're worried about being late for work. You enter their reality. Don't worry, the clock is off. We're actually not going to be late today. Traffic's really light. Let's have some tea. Let's look at the work calendar and we'll go in there. It's really about validating the feeling that they're having. They're worried. Okay. They may be worried about something that, isn't real to you and me. But it's so critical to validate that feeling because you will get nowhere fast trying to reorient them and change how they're thinking. But validating how they're feeling, trying to redirect them to something else is a completely valid approach to managing that. The other piece is using short, concrete sentences and going one step at a time, certainly not belittling them, but speaking in a way that gets at your question quicker. We tend to use a lot of extra words, which can be overwhelming. And then, as we just talked about, forces them to withdraw because they can't really engage or follow the conversation. So, really simplifying our speech, offering choices with great dignity. Okay, I see that we're struggling to get dressed this morning. Would you like the green or the blue sweater? I think the green looks great on you. I know that's your favorite color. Giving them choices to help them. Entering their reality, as I said, is also very key. If they believe that a deceased person is alive, oh, my mom, where is she? When is she coming? Saying, oh, you miss your mom. Tell me about her. Let's talk about her. Oh, when did you last see her? And then sort of soothe and redirect. The things that we want to avoid doing, and I have to admit that even at points in my own life, I've been guilty of doing this, but we definitely don't want to quiz or correct. Um, and I do this with my own grandmother, who, now as she's 103, has sort of forgotten and is a bit confused. And she just doesn't remember the period she remembers who I was, but she remembers me as a young child. And has forgotten the period in which I grew up and became an adult. So she always asks about me, but she asks about me to me. She's like, where is she? How is she? Do you see her? And rather than saying, do you know who I am? Or I've told you 3 times, no, it's me, that actually fuels so much anxiety. And there's no point in trying to argue it logically or correct misperceptions. What that does is that it doesn't work and it escalates their distress because, again, they have antennae. They feel like they're not understanding and processing this world. It is stressful to them. So just saying, when my grandmother asks about me and I'm right there, I say, she's doing great. She misses you. I know that she may not know who I am, but she knows she loves me. And so
Right.
she's so telling her that, oh, come on, it's me, would confuse her further and only escalate her stress and ruin an otherwise really special and powerful moment between us. And then I think just the other piece is avoiding open-ended demands, disciplining, saying you're wrong, you're confused, saying, why did you do that? I think we really want to avoid those types of behaviors. It's very difficult to do. I know a lot of people listening are going to say, well, that's easier said than done. And you do want to correct them at times for their safety, but really trying to approach every situation with empathy, starting with recognizing the feeling that may be driving their question or their behavior and trying to redirect them whenever possible.
Yeah, I think, and I love that you kind of meet them where they are, I think is kind of how you phrased it, which is so important. And it's also helpful for the family caregiver because let's face it, if you do try to correct, we know in the next couple minutes they're going to forget, the question they just asked and the answer you just gave, they're going to ask it again or
Yes.
say again, I'm late for work. And so the family caregiver can become so stressed out over that. Whereas if you just kind of go with the flow of the conversation, as you said, try to pivot, onto something else. I think that's so valuable for people to really get.
Right. And I don't want to diminish how tiring and exhausting this is and how much patience it requires. But I do think that there is a tremendous amount of um, there's tremendous value in this, that it can really work towards neither person feeling the need to constantly be right. And imagine living in a world that is just escaping you, and somebody telling you constantly that you're doing everything wrong in a situation where you have no control over how you're doing and how you're processing things. So being made to feel comfortable, making them feel like they are in control of their environment to the extent possible, makes a huge difference for their well-being.
Yeah. And I want to kind of pivot now into, there's been a lot of news headlines lately around Bruce Willis's wife,
Yes.
Emma Hemming Willis, who has her new book out, which I understand is really helpful, particularly for family caregivers to kind of understand that balance and stuff that we're talking about. But there are a couple things that kind of just sparked, for me, who's been in this space for a long time, and I'm sure for you too, couple of things that came out. Firstly, just to get the audience on board here, we talked earlier before you came on about the different types of dementia. Bruce Willis has frontotemporal dementia, so it's a different type. It started with aphasia, where he had the difficulty with language and communication, and then also some empathy issues that she talks a little bit about in the book. And those are all part of that particular type of dementia. But what she got so much blowback from on social media was that she made a decision. He's in the later stage now of the disease, and she had the financial resources. Many of us don't. She was able to move him into a home. I think it was just right down the street from where she lives with her younger girls, and get 24/7 care. And boy, the claws came out on social media, just calling her out and saying how wrong that was, and she was just like casting Bruce to the wind, and all these other things. And my comment, and I'd love to get you to comment on this too, is first of all, every dementia situation is different. We can't just apply, this is going to work for you because it worked over here for someone else. So every family dynamic and all of that is different. And I think that when we start to, try to make people feel bad and pressure the guilt, it makes other caregivers then not want to talk about their situation, not want to share, not reach out and get the support they need, because none of us need that kind of criticism. So talk to me a little bit about what you saw with that and what your thoughts were.
First of all, I thank you for saying that and bringing this up. I completely agree that it does silence other caregivers, and that's the last thing we need. Let's think about this. Um, I have so much to say on this topic. First of all, keeping a person with advanced dementia, any type of dementia, but especially what Bruce Willis is suffering from, which is frontotemporal dementia, is very difficult without professional help. It is extremely demanding. His specific type of dementia really brings with it very early, and he's not that old, right? So this starts at a younger age, it progresses and goes on for a longer period of time. There are a number of behavioral and safety issues, particularly with FTD, that bring and drive a higher caregiver burden than even in other types of dementias. Now, that's not to, not validate the experiences of every caregiver. As you said, the decision she made to put him there had to be one of the hardest decisions of her life. I cannot tell you how many caregivers I encountered, and we talk about this over at Enlightened Caregiver, who say, I feel like I'm dumping him. I feel like I'm giving up on him. I feel no. What I tell caregivers is this: if you first of all, if you are compromising your own health and well-being and safety to do this for another person, then you are not doing right by them. You cannot pour from an empty cup. You cannot, sacrificing your health for somebody with this disease is doing nobody a favor. Second thing is, if you knew that there was a higher level of care, if there was anything available to him that would make his condition better, you would offer it to them. And oftentimes, having structured, supervised care, opportunities for engagement is the best thing that you can give to somebody with one of these conditions that you simply cannot provide by keeping somebody at home. Life is meant to be lived, and people are, really deserve to be able to live it to the to their maximal potential. And I think by doing this, she is offering that. And I say this to caregivers all the time. If you can not care for somebody safely at home, if you are doing the very best you can with the information that you are given at one period of time, then you are doing your best. You are doing the best. Nobody makes decisions because they're trying to cast somebody off. These decisions are very challenging, very difficult to make. Data show that 1 in 4 caregivers in the US is providing 40 plus hours a week. That is a full-time job, on top of which caregivers of people with dementia work an average of 30 hours a week. And the lifetime family costs of keeping someone at home are so high. So using 24/7 care or separate care setting, this is an act of love and safety. This is not abandonment. This is doing right by them. Anybody who is saying that has simply not endured what she has had to endure, or maybe they didn't have the same options available to them. Whatever it is, every situation is unique, every family is unique. And we have to act in self-preservation. I don't think anybody who is the recipient of care wants to see their caregiver suffer and become sick. And I cannot tell you the number of caregivers I see who develop cancers, chronic conditions, other health problems as a consequence of the stress and the toll and the burden that caregiving comes with. I always say this: caregiving is not the responsibility of one individual, nor is it even the responsibility of one family. It is the responsibility of a community, of a village. And unfortunately, in our society, we just don't have them the way that we used to. But to the extent possible that you can create and develop a village of people who can help support that care, that is how it is meant to be done. And I think she is doing exactly what she needs and providing him with a safe environment where she is constantly keeping tabs, but also acting to, preserve her own well-being,
Yeah.
which she needs to do.
And to your point about a village, we're going to talk in a minute about a solution that you have, which I think helps facilitate that. But kind of going back to this, first of all, she kind of said what you said, and that is that she was burning out and she isn't trained to be a dementia healthcare professional. So to put him in the hands of professionals who do know how to manage through this. And she didn't like walk away. I mean, she still has dinner, lunch with him every day, but similar to you, she's also got 2 young girls. I think they're like 11 and 13 or something. She's gotta find that balance because she's also a caregiver to her young daughters, and she can't just, burn out for everybody. So, the other thing that really irritated me, I'm
Mhm.
just sharing my personal
Yes.
experiences with all of the stuff that came out, is that apparently, if I got this correct from one of her interviews, she said that I think it was either a doctor or some kind of healthcare professional told her, well, don't be worried about that because Bruce doesn't have any joy anymore. He doesn't have any emotions anymore. He doesn't know, kind of what's going on. And that, like, I literally like lost my head because I've talked a lot about how, yes, the communication may be more difficult and challenging and all of that, but people with dementia up into the very latest stages can still have joy. They can still connect. You use the 5 senses of, brushing their hair, rubbing lotion into their hand, whatever it is, giving them a hug. And so what are your thoughts on that? Because that's the other thing that people just want to dismiss. Well, you got dementia, so that's it. It's over.
Oh, I think that is one of the biggest things that we as a society have to correct because, there's so many people I've heard in even my colleague clinicians will say, "Oh, if that ever happened to me, just put me under, euthanize me." There's no future, and that is not true. We with the right supports, we can create environments that are safe and allow them to, as I said, live up to their maximal potential at whatever state they're in of this disease. They are able to experience moments of joy, and that may be different. What brings them joy may look a little different. How they seek joy may be a little bit different, but that doesn't mean we should deny them that. And I think, it is hard for a burnt out caregiver to be like, oh, I'm just going to supply joy to this person when you yourself have, are watching this person deteriorate in front of you. And so to the extent possible that you have a village of people who can really help to cultivate activities and help them feel like they're in a safe space. And then in those moments where you can be with them, you can focus on the connection. My father did not have dementia. He died of kidney disease. But when we were together, I often felt I was so focused on his care and treating him as if he was my patient and trying to get him rehabilitated. I wasn't focused enough on those moments of joy. I was frustrated by the system. I was frustrated that we were in this situation. I was angry at the doctors who let this go on for too long. I was frustrated that he wasn't listening to the regimen that we needed to do, all the things. I know very much how caregivers feel, having been one. And I think that gives me the most relevant experience to this, regardless of all the degrees and training I have. It's not until you've been there that you really understand this. But I will say is that your ability to give and bring joy and experience joyful moments rests on a caregiver that is not burnt out. And if that means that she has moments with her daughter and she gets to watch them grow up and she gets to and bring that joy back to him, then that is the biggest service that she can do.
Absolutely. And I think a lot of people who say those kinds of things or, criticize on social media, again, they're not realizing that there are two people in this situation because she's a big part of this. And so to just say to her, "Oh, it's all over." I mean, that's not hopeful, that's not helpful, and the family caregiver needs that kind of support too. So let me segue because we're talking a little bit now about, again, the family caregiver, the burnout. My mantra has been self-care for the last couple of decades. That's what I've been writing about and in all my books and everything that I do. There, you are very immersed in a lot of the research that's going on, and I know that recently the Alzheimer's Association had their International Dementia Conference where all the researchers from the world come around together and they share their latest research. And there's been a couple of great studies. I know the Sprint Mind study was about blood pressure and maintaining, controlling that 120/80, particularly the 120 systolic number. And then I think this summer they talked about the Pointer study, which was more around those lifestyle factors that we can all adopt early in life that will hopefully, reduce our risk because we know we don't have a cure yet and we're still doing research on why, but particularly women being two-thirds of all of the Alzheimer's cases. So I just wanted you to give us some of your insights around what caregivers can do to take care of themselves, because particularly dementia caregivers we know have a lot more stress, a lot more strain, and are in their role typically longer, or any other research that you've seen that could be helpful for our family caregivers out there who are saying, what are the things I should know about that maybe I don't hear about in the news?
Yeah, absolutely. So I was at AAIC. It's a great meeting of over 10,000 experts from around the globe in dementia care. For those who are interested, there's a great story on my Instagram that sits in the highlights about all the key findings that came out of that meeting. But I think you are on to some really key things. And one of the things that we're increasingly learning, which I feel as though it's something we've always known, but it's just becoming clearer and clearer, is around the importance of lifestyle factors and the role that they play in preventing our risk of developing dementia. And what's so fascinating to me is that in addition to attending AAIC, I also attended a conference sponsored by the National Institutes of Health on the intersection of multiple chronic conditions and the development of Alzheimer's disease. And speaking for the caregivers for 1 second, think about when in our lives we're doing the bulk of caregiving. In our 40s, in our 50s, even in our 60s, as we're parenting children and working jobs and caring for aging parents. This is when a lot of these conditions come up and emerge, right? So when we're caring for moms, we don't have time to exercise. Oh, I stopped cooking dinner because I'm so busy between work and caring for the kids and my parents that I'm not eating properly. This time in life, interestingly, when we're doing all this caregiving, is actually when we start to develop some of these diseases like high blood pressure, diabetes, all of which the research is now increasingly telling us that the presence of these these conditions will increase our likelihood of developing dementia later on. And what I always tell people is that your health at 40 dictates your health at 60, and your health at 60 dictates your health at 80, and your health at 80 dictates your health at 100. So we have to really think about how our lifestyles impact this. But to me, this is something we've always known. Heart health is brain health, right? There's several types of dementia, and Alzheimer's disease being one of them. But one of the most dementias are really mixed. And usually what we'll see is they have maybe Alzheimer's dementia mixed with something we call vascular dementia. And vascular dementia is really what happens when the blood flow to our brain, from our heart to our brains, is impeded, and therefore our brains don't function at their optimal capacity, leading to dementia-like symptoms. And so I remind people that the more that we engage, and this is what we found at AAIC, the results of the Pointer study, which were published in JAMA in July, they found that really a multi-domain lifestyle program. So if we focus on Mediterranean diet, olive oil, healthy fats, high fiber grains, fish, these heart healthy diets that we've known about for a long time, plus cognitive and social engagement. I cannot tell, people ask me, what's the one thing I can do to avoid my risk of dementia? I say work as long as possible. And I don't mean keep your paid job that you hate. I mean, give yourself a reason to get up in the morning, a sense of purpose, monitoring your health, but really thinking that these lifestyle factors made such a difference in that study in terms of preventing the onset of cognitive impairment. And we know that good intensive blood pressure control is important. To reduce our risk of cognitive impairment, and some of those changes. So the takeaway is that heart health is brain health. All the things we know about diet and exercise, which lower our risk of heart disease, also help and reduce our risk of dementia. And it is very important for dementia caregivers to hear this, because I think most of this risk we develop in midlife when we are so busy and distressed. I always tell my clinician colleagues, when you are seeing a patient, and I tell this to my students, my medical students, my nursing students, please don't just ask the patient how they're doing. Ask the person who brought them into the appointment how they're doing, because I bet you nobody has. And so it's really important to think about this in terms of risk reduction and think about the toll. And that's why, again, back to the Emma Willis point, I salute her, because she has to put her health first to support a positive outcome for her as well.
Yeah, and I think the one thing that I've tried to write about in my book, and I have this program called Me Time Monday, is because when you say that, and I know I've been there myself when people have said, "Oh, you should do this, you should do this," they're well-meaning, and it's like you're like, "I have no time.
I
I
know, I
can't
get it.
even take a shower,"
I,
And so I say, take little steps, because you'll start to feel empowered. You'll start to feel like you've got control back. If 7 minutes a week, 7 minutes a day, whatever it is, just small. But what are some of your tips when people say, "I just don't have time to cook good meals and, walk or do whatever I need to do exercise-wise?"
I hear you. I say if there's one activity you could do, if you had 15 minutes free in a given day and you could do one thing, I would say it would be to go outside, go for a walk with a friend. Like, that would be my ideal prescription for any caregiver. It's important to go outside, to get fresh air, to clear your mind, not to doom scroll on social media, which is like more of an avoidant behavior. You don't necessarily have to be a meditator or someone who does journaling, though those are all incredibly wonderful things. But if you can bring yourself to go out for a short walk, even 15 minutes, and connect with nature and connect with a person, that is one of the most helpful and important things you can do for yourself. But how do you find the time? Where do you find the time? I think when we schedule ourselves, particularly women, we tend to schedule our lives around the needs of everybody else. We put them first on the calendar, and then wherever there's time left over. And that is not a sustainable way to do things. I think there needs to be a role shift a bit. And it is not I keep telling people it's not selfishness, it's self-preservation. And again, if you operate from the mindset that I cannot do this and fill from an empty cup, that if my health is compromised, I am no good to this person, and his outcome or her outcomes are going to be a lot worse. You have to start to think, okay, what are the few things I can do? And so when you start to plan and build out your schedule, where, if you blocked off every morning from 6 to 7 a.m. or 9 to 10 p.m., whatever suits your lifestyle, and you said, this is my time, nobody can interrupt this time. This is my time for whatever it needs to do. Sometimes it will be for paying bills and household tasks. Sometimes it will be for going for a walk. But it is your time. It is your time to choose what you do. And it gives, I think, provides some sense of control in an otherwise uncontrollable situation. As caregivers, we are constantly sitting around waiting for the next crisis to unfold. That is the reality of our life. And so I think the more that we can prioritize ourselves, put our own oxygen masks on first, and rewrite this narrative. And the problem is it's driven by the commenters on social media who have never been in this situation. And we need to drive as caregivers the conversation and say, no, caregivers, the right thing to do is to put yourself first. It is to preserve your health and your well-being and your mental health and your positive connection with this person. And if that means that they have to be moved elsewhere, that's what has to happen. If that means that you need to take an hour and somebody else has to take over, that's fine too. I also really encourage caregivers to remember one thing my mother's always told me, which is that people are not mind readers. If you have never been in this situation, you don't know what a person needs. And sometimes if you're like me, you're terrible at asking for help. But if somebody says, what can I do? Or even if they don't, saying, could you please help for 1 hour on Sundays? If that hour doesn't work for you on Sundays, then maybe it's an hour on Saturdays. But wherever it is asking and identifying for the help that you need and setting firm boundaries early in the stages of this about what you are and are not willing to do. Caregiving, I think, really falls in and has impacts in a couple of areas. There's the physical demands of caregiving, the emotional demands of caregiving, the financial demands of caregiving. There's the clinical coordination and management piece. Which of those are you willing to do? Which of them are you unwilling to do? Where do you draw the line? And you are completely allowed to draw a firm line. And then bringing help in some of those areas. But saying, which many caregivers I'm in contact with do, that I will do this until I can't anymore, is not a healthy or productive approach to doing this. You want to do it as long as you can. Therefore, we must delegate this is a marathon, not a sprint. And I think we just don't realize that until we burnt out and it's too late.
I love that. I love the scheduling because that's important. It's putting yourself on the calendar and getting, asking and accepting help. We've only got a couple minutes left. I knew this was going to go fast. We have so many things we want to talk to you about, but I don't want to let you go before having you tell us about Caremobi, which is actually what I call age tech innovation. And it's an app that you've developed. Tell us a little bit about how that helps caregivers.
Yes. So Caremobi is an app that I created when my own father was sick. My mother was this extraordinary caregiver who kept all his information, his medications, what he was eating, how he was sleeping, in a wonderful detailed notebook. And when I went to go take him to his appointments and the doctor said, well, how's he been eating? How's he been sleeping? Is he still taking this medication? I would say, I don't know. My mom takes care of him. And I know that if we want there to be a village among us, we need to be able to share and delegate this responsibility so it doesn't feel like it's constantly falling on one person. So I created Caremobi to substitute that notebook. It's a centralized hub for families. It's an app that sits on your phone where you can track and share information and updates about a loved one's day-to-day health, whether that's their appointments, when they are, where they are, what the doctor said, whether it's their day-to-day health information, how they've been sleeping, how they've been eating, bowel movements, which we're about to launch. Also, it's in a place where you can store their important documents, their insurance cards, any directives, lab results, anything else that you might need because doctors don't talk to each other. And then, of course, medications. What medications are they on? Get push notifications so you never miss one. And I will tell you, it is a completely free tool. It was paid for and developed with support from the National Institutes of Health through grants I acquired. It is meant to be a safe and secure way. There's no stealing of data. Everything is HIPAA compliant. The data are securely protected, never to be seen by anyone but you and your care team. And you retain full control over who is on that care team, whether it's your sister, a home health aide, whomever you so choose to include. But you can track and share information seamlessly so that when you get to that doctor's appointment, you can advocate and really show them what's going on at home. And that helps primary care providers like me make really good and better informed decisions.
Well, thank you for all of this. And it's just been great and delightful to talk to you. We're going to have links, by the way, to Caremobi and Enlightened Caregiver and everything. But is there any last thoughts, or do you want to give us the URL where people can find out more and how to connect with you?
Yes, absolutely. So definitely follow along either on Instagram or Facebook at at Enlightened Caregiver, and then the other piece is to visit us at Caremobi CareMobi.org. You can also download the app for free, Caremobi Caregiving app for Android and Apple users in your preferred Apple store. But please feel free to connect with me. I love to hear from caregivers, and I love to think about and strategize on what we can do better to make sure that the people that we love get optimal, not usual care.
Well, it's just been wonderful talking to you. So much great information. And I just really appreciate having you on the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. Thanks for all you do.
Yeah, you too. Take care.
Take care.
I had a great conversation with Dr. Tina. She is just lovely and so brilliant and so many great insights. So we're going to have links to all of her stuff, her Enlightened Caregiver on Instagram, the Caremobi app, more information about her. But we just were really delighted to have her on this episode. So now let's take a look at our well home design news. And I'm going to go again through this pretty quickly. First of all, September is National Emergency Preparedness Month. And, we know that about half of the population doesn't really prepare for any kind of natural disaster. And yet there isn't one little sliver of land in the US that doesn't suffer from some kind of natural disaster, depending on the season. So, whether that was like, for instance, the horrific fires that we just had out near me in Southern California in January, whether it's the terrific and horrific flood that happened in Texas, whether it's the hurricanes and the tornadoes and the ice, iced over streets and communities, and it's everywhere, right? Even the volcanoes are erupting. That I just saw on the news the other day. So whatever it is, and wherever you live, we are facing natural disasters. And so when we, think about it, if your older loved one, particularly if they don't live in the same city or near you, how are they going to manage in a natural disaster? And that's a question whether they live at home and whether, again, both parents are alive but older, maybe not as active, or, mom's got sciatica and dad's got COPD, can't walk very far, or you've got full blown, somebody's had a heart attack or someone has dementia, a lot of other issues. So that could be at home, or they're living at home alone. And they're just not maybe as strong, in terms of, again, walking far distances, crawling up into the attic to get out of the onto the roof in case of a flood. But also, if they're living in assisted living or memory care, what do you know about what the evacuation process is? And that's a great question, by the way, to ask of the administrators of that particular community where your loved one lives. What happens in the case of emergency? How do you connect with me? What do you do? Where do you take my loved one? Those are great things to just get ahead of and know. And then there's something called a go bag. Now, a go bag is essential for all of us, but really, really critical for older loved ones. In fact, you don't even need a natural disaster to create a go bag. My mom has had some health issues, and we've had the paramedics have to take her to emergency. And, having a go bag right there in the closet, right where you exit out the front door, is essential, because you get to the hospital, and depending on what time, she may have had her pajamas on, and, now she needs kind of her nice sweater and sweats or whatever, or some walking shoes, or, her hearing aid case or eyeglass. I mean, all of these things. So I'm going to make it easy on you. And I'm going to do two things. I'm going to have a link that you can watch my webinar on what to know about natural disasters and your older loved one. How do you keep them safe? What kind of go bag do they need? What should be in that go bag? What do you ask the facility or community if your loved one lives in memory care or somewhere else? All these. How do you have the conversation, right? What do you do if your loved one has a pet? Because the Red Cross shelters do not accept pets. So where does your, mom or grandmother's beloved pet go? I know we're going to dress Penny up as a little baby so she can, hopefully we can just say she's a little, she's a little kid. I don't know what we're going to do with her. But these are all things that we kind of have to think a little bit ahead and know, okay, what's going to be my plan and how do I communicate that? So I'm going to have that webinar link for you, and that's going to be my freebie. That's something I do every year. Normally, I charge the big bucks of my clients and employers and others to do these webinars, but this one is a freebie for you guys because it's so important. And I'm also going to have my recommendation, I'll have that on the episode guide page of the go bag. And as I said, it's great and essential to have a go bag for your older loved one, but it's also good for us. I have my own go bag so that if I do need to take my mom to emergency and I know I'm going to be there for 6, 8 hours or more, I've got an energy bar, I've got a bottle of water, I've got this, I've got that, I've got something to read or whatever. So it's important for us as well to have our own go bags in these types of situations. And again, even if we're just caring for older loved ones, go bags are really a great thing to have. So I'm going to have that. That's emergency month. I also wanted to go back to Alzheimer's, World Alzheimer's Day, and talk to you about a study that came out that used the Zinnia TV. And Zinnia TV is a really great solution for dementia adults and their family caregivers. And so, as many of you know who care for someone with Alzheimer's or another type of dementia, there comes a point in the progression of the disease where they can't really follow the storyline of dramas or news or whatever it is. It gets confusing. Also, let's just face it, the news is depressing. You turn on the news, it's all bad and it's bloody and it's just we need to stay, of course, on top of the news, but it's, not something you want to sit your loved one in front of for a couple hours. And again, following the news is very difficult. So what Zinnia TV has done is they have created imagery, and it's not just passive watching videos, but it's watching different storylines evolve with imagery that really connects with the dementia brain, calms the dementia brain. And it's a variety. It could be food, it could be pets and animals, it could be travel and leisure. They've got so many different topics and things, but it's something that is really great because it engages the brain of your loved one. And even as a family caregiver, sitting and watching this with them is very calming and it's almost meditative. So you want to maybe check that out. We're going to have a link to Zinnia TV on our episode guide page, but also this study that just came out that talked about the 7 key areas of what this type of programming can do for a dementia adult and family caregivers. Provides comfort, connects with the person's interests and background, builds the relationship. They may talk or ask a question once they see a certain image, promotes engagement and interaction, facilitates activities of daily living, giving them a sense of community, and facilitating the impact of using appropriate technological equipment. That's the official research terminology, by the way. All of it is saying it's good. It's all good. And there are definite benefits to using it. So I'm going to have connections to that. It's about meaning, it's about motion, watching visual things, and maybe getting your loved one to laugh or clap or, just be actively involved. And it's about music, right? It's about the soundtracks. And music we know is very important to a dementia Alzheimer's brain. It's the last memory that our brains actually keep. So all of this becomes really essential, and Zinnia TV is a great provider of that. And then again, they've done other studies that show that stress can be reduced by, 78 to I think 82 or 84% for both the dementia adult as well as the family caregiver. Then I want to move into something called dopamine design. This is a new term that's being used. It's really neurodesign, which you guys have heard me talk about. We had Linda Kafka from the Neurodesign Academy on. I'm going to have that link on our episode guide page, and she talked all about what is neurodesign, but dopamine design is really the same thing. And all it is really how do you create design in your home that creates a dopamine, which is our reward, area of the brain. It creates that little burst of happiness because dopamine is one of our 4 happiness hormones, as I write about in my Me Time Monday book. So I'm going to just, kind of capture that for you guys. I have another free webinar. Ooh, you get a twosie for this one. Another free webinar that I'll have a link to. It's called Dementia Friendly Design, and it has in it what I'm working on now, which is my 3rd book called The Snug Home. But it's all about something I've written about in the past, which is the 5 C's of neurodesign. And what are those? Those are curves, color, contrast, comfort sources, and clutter-free environments. And this is all part of the environmental wellness of my Me Time Monday book. And I'm going to dig into that more in my third book. But this clutter-free is interesting because there's also something that is trending on TikTok, hundreds of millions of views of thousands of these videos that are being posted by people of all ages called depression rooms, or some people are even calling it, let's see, it's also called doom piles. And that's all about clutter, okay? And it's all about how, let's not laugh because when you are in a cluttered environment, and that environment can be in your home, or one room in your home, or it could be at your office. It could be in your neighborhood. You feel like there's just like trash everywhere and things are kind of dirty or whatever. Any of this kind of clutter really sends our ancient brains into like stress mode, right? Fight or flight. And part of it is because clutter doesn't allow us to really see what's around that curve. Like, is there something hiding behind that pile of magazines, or all those clothes that are stacked up on that chair, or your exercise bike in your house, which is what mine used to be, just a clothes hanger. But we can't see. So it makes us stressed. It gives us anticipatory stress. So there is something that really does function within the brain that just hates clutter, which is why we like the wide open designs of home design. It's why we like to see a lot of light, windows out onto nature that will calm our brains. But that clutter is really a big one. And the National Alliance for Mental Illness talks about clutter and mental health, talks about depression, talks about anxiety, talks about all the things that can happen if you live in a cluttered environment. Now, if you're a busy caregiver, here again, what are the things that get dropped? Well, usually your me time. The second thing would be keeping the house clutter free, right? You're coming home and exhausted, you're just throwing things onto a chair or whatever. I get it. I've been there. Many of us have been there. We can relate. But what we want to do is we want to help you. So in my book, I write a little bit about this, and also our friend Matt Paxton. I'm going to have a link to his podcast interview with us because he wrote a whole book on how to live clutter free and what to do with stuff. But there's a couple things I'm going to give you some insights on. First of all, small steps. Just take one drawer. You don't have to do the whole garage, in the next 2 hours. Take one drawer, take one pile, take one maybe category, like I'm going to clean out the top, shelf on the fridge. Or I'm going to clean out, for me, it's, clean out all the old makeup and stuff that you're never using. Maybe it's clothing, dresses, go through just your dresses and get rid of certain things. Set a timer, 7 minutes or less, and you're done. And then you let it go. You don't stress about you're not getting it done. You did your 7 minutes today. Tomorrow you'll have another 7 minutes, but just give yourself that time. You're going to feel like you accomplished something. Maybe you didn't complete it, didn't finish it, but you accomplished something. You started and you made progress. Everything has to have a place. This is a big one for me because and again, I'm going to go back to like my bathroom counter. I have a lot of stuff out on the counter. Well, really, everything should have a place, and it should be in a drawer. It should be tucked behind, so everything is clutter free. Your counter is clutter free. I mean, that is, that's my dream. I'm not there yet, but I have been better. I've been getting better about putting things into a drawer. Everything has to have a place to be and out of my eyesight. And if you can't achieve that, then you need to start, purging or doing whatever, which is kind of like what I've been doing. And again, it's slow going, but I'm getting there. I'm feeling a lot better about stuff. But everything has to have a place. Also, visual and mobile clearance. You don't want fall hazard stuff that people are going to fall over. You don't want it to be in hallways or in, walkways. Particularly if your loved one has a walker or something, you're going to need to have a wide berth there. You again, visually, you want to be able to see things clearly. So that becomes kind of, something that you need to think about is the visual and the mobile clearance. And then the 5 things rule is something that a lot of these TikTok videos are talking about. And they're saying you should only have 5 major things in a room. So if you're in a bedroom, you've got your bed, you've got your end table, you've got a chair maybe, you've got a dresser or, whatever. What are we up to? 4, and then you get one more thing. a light. That's it. And you're done. So, but think about really, again, pulling back from all the stuff. What can you purge? What can you get rid of? I also will say I adopted the Swedish death cleaning program, which is a great, famous little book, but it's all about how you get rid of things. And I've both sold things like clothes on Poshmark and purses and shoes, but I've also, donated, and I've also given things away to nieces and nephews and godsons and goddaughters and others. It's like, here, I'm not even using this anymore, and they're delighted. A lot of them love kind of some of that vintage style because, to me it's still new, but to them it's vintage. But whatever it is, do whatever you can to just kind of purge things in your life and have this like clutter-free environment. It's so important. And then you get rid of the depression rooms and the doom piles and you feel much better. And again, I know it's tough when you're caregiving to do all of this, so maybe you can encourage your kids, your spouse or partner, your roommate, whomever, to help you out, but also do it a little yourself, only because when we accomplish something like that, no matter how small, again, we get a dopamine release. It makes us feel good. It's like, okay, I can't control so many things going on with my mom, but I can control this. And guess what? I got that whole little drawer finally organized. I know where everything is. I feel so good. So try it out, because again, get off the social media, get off the TikTok videos, and do one little drawer. It'll make you feel really good and a lot better than doom scrolling on social media. That's my last negative social media comment for this podcast. Anyway, we really appreciate you listening to all of these great ideas for well home design. Thank you for joining us on this episode. A reminder, you can find more information in my book, Me Time Monday, The Weekly Wellness Plan to Find Balance and Joy for a Busy Life, or visit MeTimeMonday.com or CaregivingClub.com. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Caregiving Club on Air. Please hit the subscribe button. To listen to us on Spotify, Apple and Google Podcasts, Amazon Music, SiriusXM, iHeartRadio, Pandora, as well as other listening channels. Check out all the resources and article links on our episode guide page at caregivingclub.com. Just hit the podcast tab at the top and email us with comments and questions at podcast@caregivingclub.com. Thank you again for listening, and take care and stay well.